claiming benefits could be able to buy a property under plans which are set to be announced by Boris Johnson in the next hour. At the moment, people who claim benefits to pay their rent do not find it easy to get a mortgage. They're not allowed to declare housing benefit as part of their income in order to get the loan. And you'll know that if you claim the benefit yourself, you can't, of course, use it for monthly mortgage payments. The government says it wants to change that. This is potentially the biggest idea they've had since taking office. And their idea is that the £30 billion a year in housing benefit, which is currently put to people to spend on rent, would be better utilised if they could use it to pay a mortgage to get themselves on the property ladder. More than 3 million people claim housing benefit, mostly via universal credit. According to the government, home ownership among 25 to 34-year-olds has fallen from 55% to 34% since 1996. So if you're under the age of 35, you're unlikely. Well, one in three doesn't have any home at all. Something the government says it wants to reverse. Is that a good idea? Should we encourage people on benefits to take on a mortgage to try and increase the rates of home ownership? Maybe you've struggled to buy a property yourself with your own money and you think this is unfair. Email vine@bbc.co.uk. Please include your phone number so we can call you back. Text us 88291. We speak first to the Director for the Centre of Policy Studies, Robert Colvile. You like the sense of this, I gather, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, we need to see the exact detail, but essentially, according to our calculations, we spend 2.3 pence supporting, home people who low-income people who are in ownership, rather than for every pound we spend supporting people who rent. Like, that's a really bad deal for the country. The costs of paying someone's housing benefit throughout their lives are utterly astronomical, especially when they get to the age when they need social care and don't have any housing wealth to draw on. So doing whatever we can to move people from renting into ownership is great for them, and it's great for the country's finances.
So you need, I suppose, some confidence with the banks who were lending the money, because they might regard people on benefits as bad loans, and therefore I guess you'd have to underwrite the whole lot, would you?
I don't think so. I think the issue is that, if you're using a right to buy scheme, for example, one of the reasons that it's fallen off a cliff is because it's overwhelmingly in your long-term interests, but in the short term, it's really tough. As soon as you decide, right, I'm going to try and buy my own house using this scheme that's available, you basically lose access to a whole suite of housing benefit as described. You have to bear extra maintenance costs. So if a sudden sort of short-term financial shock comes along, you're absolutely screwed. Which is why a lot of people who would be better off and could probably make that leap haven't been doing it.
Do you think it would require a deposit from people on benefits?
Well, so the way the current right to buy scheme works is that the government helps with that and provides a discount. I don't think we're going to be seeing people on universal credit sort of putting down deposits on nice semis in Guildford or flats in Mayfair. I think, this isn't just. We need to see the detail, but I think this isn't just about people, sort of new buyers as well. Like, one stat people don't really know about is that a third of people in poverty are actually in relative poverty. Are actually owner-occupiers rather than renters. And they get their access to benefits is much, much less than people who have exactly the same incomes but happen to be renting. And that's really unfair.
Thank you very much, Robert Colvile, Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. Let's talk to Jonathan Blake, BBC political correspondent. We're still trying to flesh this out, really, Jonathan, aren't we?
Yes, and I think it's fair to say this is not in any way a fully formed policy from the government today. There are big questions about how all this is going to work. And as you were speaking to Robert about there, specifically this issue of allowing people to use housing benefit payments towards the cost of a mortgage. Now, the government has said in addressing some of the questions that have already risen about, well, how can you save for a deposit when if you have a certain amount of savings, you can't claim any more benefits? What about the idea of getting people into huge amounts of debt in the middle of what for many is a cost of living crisis? We're told that it may be working around some sort of savings scheme, possibly through the Help to Buy or Lifetime ISA. Money that was saved specifically for a deposit could be excluded from that allowance that people are allowed to save before their benefits start to reduce or completely disappear. So that's a suggestion of how this could work. And the government admits this is not going to be for everybody. It's what they describe as a ladder of opportunity for those who want to take it, and they want to address some of the problems around people effectively being banned from owning their own home due to being able to claim and being supported by universal credit while they're in work and have some money at their disposal as well.
I suppose with these things there are always unintended consequences, and one of them might be that somebody who has a mortgage and a house realises that it is worth their while becoming unemployed in order to draw the benefit that then pays the mortgage.
Yeah, and the government says that we have a situation where too many people are spending their money on private rental, which they could be investing in their own home and unlocking the opportunity, as they describe it, of home ownership. But if you are claiming universal credit, there are limits on how much money you can save before that benefit starts to reduce or perhaps be denied completely. So, as I say, there are big questions about how all this is going to work, and it is a bit, I think, of political positioning we're seeing from Boris Johnson today, with all this talk about housing and home ownership, and still big questions about the policy and the detail of it.
He needs the policy to lift off at some point, because I gather today we're seeing a major challenge by lawyers against people who would have been on the first flight to Rwanda, which is a separate policy. But if that then gets blocked, he needs something to work here.
He does, and you get the feeling that they're scrabbling around for something, and this is being billed as something of a reset moment for Boris Johnson. Of course, he faced that vote of confidence among his own MPs last week, and we're seeing the fallout from that now. He needs to do what many people in his party want him to do, which is reduce the tax burden overall, to cut taxes at some point. He'll be looking for ways to perhaps do that, but what he's focusing on today, in particular housing and more broadly the economy, promising further measures over the next few weeks. Not quick or easy fixes, he'll say, but things that will help people deal with the pressures on household income at the moment. So, yes, a key time for Boris Johnson and a crucial time for him to shore up support within his party.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Blake, BBC political correspondent. Let's talk to Henry Pryor, property expert. You've got already some questions here, Henry, I know. To say the least.
Too true, Jeremy. To say the least. I mean, it is extraordinary for a man who, let's face it, struggled to regain his own MP's confidence at the start of this week. He has utterly shattered the vast majority of both the property and the social housing sector with this announcement. It isn't just ill thought through, it's half-baked, and it doesn't make sense. This is a plan, Jeremy, you may remember. In fact, you and I spoke about when David Cameron first launched this back in the end of 2015. It didn't work then. They tried to tweak it so that they might be able to make it work, but it ran into the sand. Unfortunately, here it is again, just being resurrected at a time when, frankly, we've got far bigger pressures and problems that the government need to be solving, and ideas that they need to come up with to solve the housing crisis. And the idea that those who are on universal credit are somehow going to be bold enough to squirrel away money into savings that may or may not be excluded from the computation that allows them to get those benefits in the first place, I'm afraid shows that at least some within the government appear to be not just semi-detached but totally detached from the housing reality.
Well, part two of this policy is to do with housing association properties, and it's an echo of Margaret Thatcher's right to buy council homes. So you would be giving increased ability of social housing tenants to buy the property they're in. Would you feel good about that?
Spot on. I mean, what we're talking about here is a policy that was widely trumpeted, that came originally, ironically, as a Labour policy back in the day, but was implemented by Mrs Thatcher famously. And it's one thing to, and it would indeed works from a practical perspective on council properties which are owned effectively by the state. But housing associations and charities are corporate entities that rely on their stock of property and the value in those properties to be able to go out into the markets and borrow money in order to build more social housing. Remember, we have approximately 2 million households on social housing waiting lists at the moment, desperately looking for more social housing accommodation. So rather than flogging off these or forcing the housing associations to flog off at a discount these properties, which despite the Housing Secretary's promises this morning would be replaced on a like-for-like, one-for-one basis, we know history tells us that that is not what's done. They've been replaced at a far lower rate, sadly, than what they've previously committed to, as I say, under the Cameron suggestion. And this is a policy that's going to come forward depleting housing associations from their assets, removing access to affordable housing for those in society who need it most, and I'm afraid is a policy that is bound, once again, despite having been trailed before, is doomed to failure.
Thank you so much, Henry. Lovely to speak to you. Henry Pryor, property expert, and before